Hey, what's up guys? Node Investor here. Hope everyone is doing well. I'm doing a weekly recap as we head into the weekend after a relatively flat and very choppy, trendless week. I'm going to be taking a look at the longer term charts, mostly daily and weekly charts for Bitcoin. We'll look at some key levels here near term and cover a few notable news items that we saw this week. So thanks for being here today, guys. Quick apologies, I have not been able to post new videos this week. I had promised you guys a live stream and I was still pretty much under the weather, so I had to forego that, but we will certainly get one scheduled here as soon as possible. And for those of you that are tracking along the trading Bitcoin, I will be posting a new episode of that probably over the weekend. But spoiler alert, I got chopped up here pretty good, so it's going to be negative and some good lessons learned, as well as sharing some documentation and all that stuff. So before we get going on the charts, let's take a quick look at the coin market cap. So the total crypto market cap is trading just shy of $122 billion right now, with the number 2 back again, Ripple, then Ethereum, then Bitcoin Cash here at number 4. And as I noted in the chart earlier, pretty much a flat week. You can see here BTC down less than 1%, up, down a little bit throughout the week. Very choppy action. Ethereum was down a little bit more, but again, 5%. Bitcoin Cash down 4%. EOS up 1%. Most of the major names, just small gains, single digits for sure. There were some really big moves in some of the small cap names this week. That seemed to be the only thing pumping. You had some pretty decent moves off the lows. Other than that, Binance coin was looking pretty good. Continues to march higher here. A good outlier, but if we scroll down the list, not a lot of major movement, but there were a few biggies. Augur up 60%, Steam almost 40%, and a few others here. So certainly a pretty good week in some of the small micro cap names, mid cap names, a few of those. I didn't trade very many of those. It was just a relatively quiet week. Most of the major names are just kind of following suit with Bitcoin. They're just tracking higher and tracking lower. We've had a few false starts to the upside, to the downside. No major breakout of this range we're in. We'll take a look at the charts here, but again, they're just kind of following along with Bitcoin. There are some pretty good setups though out there starting to take place. Some potential lows being set in the alt BTC pairs. And so it's just going to come down to which direction does Bitcoin break out of here next. And I expect we'll see that in the coming days or week at most. As we know, generally these periods of low volatility don't last too long. And so there's a couple things I'll point out when we look at the charts. Looking at the total market cap again, just pretty much in a flat, choppy range here for the last week. Not a lot of action ever since the drop we had after failing to break over that $140 billion mark. That was BTC trying to get over 4,100. Couldn't happen. And since then, just been flat and choppy here, sitting around that low 120s mark. And then looking at the BTC dominance, again, just sitting tight, drifting, edging up slightly here, up into that 52%, 53% range, as some of the bigger cap names, Ethereum, Bitcoin Cash, Ripple, drift a little bit lower versus BTC. And so that's what's really driving a large part of this dominance here going up. Some notable news items. So Ethereum's blockchain fork upgrade, Constantinople, was delayed till the end of February. Now it's interesting that this happens to coincide with the planned last date of the VanEck Bitcoin ETF. But with the government shut down here in the United States, the SEC is also shut down. So I wonder if they're gonna delay that review of that ETF. But we saw the delay of this Ethereum upgrade and the market reacted very negatively when the news came out. I was kind of surprised at how negative it reacted. Now, this was driven by a flaw in the code that really could have potentially been a big deal, really caused some real issues. So it's good that they caught this before they delayed the fork happening, and the market just had a quick and sudden sell-off, both ETH and BTC, which took down many of the alts when that happened. And so I'll post a link to this here, some news bits along those lines, but that has now been delayed until the end of February. So we'll see how the market reacts going into that date. Once again, there's going to be quite a few news items as we approach that time frame. So it's going to be real interesting, and most likely pretty volatile. Another interesting item I saw here was the law enforcement request to shapeshift rose 175% in the second half. Now, we know that law enforcement, government agencies from around the world, and very heavily from the US, will routinely send requests for information to these exchanges on users, and for a lot of good reasons, right? Trying to track down money laundering, terrorism, ransomware, hackers, etc., etc. But I just want to caution everybody, because I still see a lot of the newer folks that come into the space, and there is this assumption that cryptocurrency and a lot of the transactions that take place are private and anonymous. And if you're using exchanges, if you're using these tools, very rarely is it going to be private and anonymous. And you can almost bet, you can count on it, that they're going to share information with governments as requested. They're going to share wallet addresses, IP addresses, email addresses, login device information, anything they can to try to piece the trail together. And oftentimes, as is often the case, unfortunately, there is an overreach, and there is just so much information that is generally shared and collected. And so it is what it is, but just be aware of that, especially as we head into this next tax season for people that have to report taxes for 2018. Just keep that in mind. Just assume and treat it just like you would any other trading and investment account. That's my approach. Stay above board. Try to stay out of trouble, but just keep that in mind, guys. It's, you know, when you're using these exchanges, you have to just assume that they will likely at some point share information because they are just trying to be compliant and trying not to get shut down and all that stuff. So it is what it is, but unfortunately, very often there is a little bit of an overreach that happens. In this article is more about Shapeshift, and you know, it's kind of interesting to see them point out Shapeshift, because that was really one of the early account-free tools that really allowed for exchanging some of these tokens and all that. It was really just such a great thing, and now they have, you know, required memberships and all that stuff. So has lost a little bit of its luster, and you guys know where I stand on that one. But thought I'd share this article with you guys. Check it out if you haven't already. Let's take a look at the chart. So first off, looking at the BTC daily chart here, and we can see here, since this big drop here that we had late last week, there wasn't a whole lot of action since then. Just very choppy range, very much range bound. A couple of technical things we want to point out here. First, the blue line here below the yellow line, those are the EMAs, and they are inverted, and generally that is bearish. That is technically identifying a dropping trend. Now, since this big drop, prices have gone sideways. They need to get back above this to start mitigating this and start turning the corner. But right now, the trend is leaning bearish. Sellers remain in control. Any kind of rallies have been shut down. And the key level to be watching is essentially a daily close around that $3,700 level. If prices can get back above that, it'll start to mitigate some of this. But above 3,700, then the top of this little wick here, which is 3,710. Those are the two levels to be watching here in the very short run. If prices can get above that, there's going to be some intraday resistance levels above here, but ultimately they're going to come down to the same level that failed here a couple of days back, right around that 4,100 basically. So it'd be interesting to see if we get a retest or a lower high above that. But in the big picture, just very much choppy, range-bound market. On the downside, some things to watch out for here. Let me zoom up a little bit for us. Of course, very important support right now is this week's low, just below that $3,500 level, and then below that, key support at these most recent lows here, just above that $3,100 level. But I've been noticing that there is this big bear pennant starting to form on that weekly chart, especially after this break. And so it's just leaning in favor of the sellers right now. If you look at the weekly chart, the 10 EMA is still above prices and starting to come in. Most of this bounce was really a bounce into the moving averages. And so just keep an eye on these levels. If we get a break, we're going to likely retest that low, and there's a good chance we may undercut it. It's not, from a percentage basis, a massive zone. I'm watching this price really start to narrow here in the big picture, especially on the weekly view chart. Just keep that in mind here. Let's take a quick look at that weekly chart. And from this point of view, very clear. You can see that here. I'll zoom in a little bit, but you can see 10 EMA just really dropping fast, starting to approach these prices. Prices have not been able to get above that. And so just keep that in mind, guys. Technically speaking, based on the chart, based on the technicals, based on the recent price action here in the big picture, we are still very much in a bear market. The trend has not been confirmed. Now, there is the potential for a low being set. We've had a rally potentially have set a higher low here, but we have not seen any confirmation. And again, the key levels really are this little zone here above that 4100 level to start edging up, and it's going to be a series of resistance levels to be testing along the way up. And of course, if prices really rally, that's going to be the ultimate test, that big 6K level that broke on the way down. And so right now we're still very much in a broader downtrend in the big scheme of things, chopping around a little bit, bouncing off the lows, but nothing has been confirmed. And again, looking at that potential bear flag forming here on the weekly chart, that's this picture right there. Let me fix that line here. And so it's going to be real interesting to see how this plays out over the coming weeks. Two ways that I'm watching this here. Obviously, we could see a bounce, another failure right at that 4K level, and then a move lower. Or you could just see a break before that and a move lower down. Now, doing a technical measured move on this pattern, you can see this projects down to around that $2,400, $2,500 level. I've also noticed that the volume is really declining during this consolidation here, and so it's really starting to coil up here. It certainly could go either way. I think the most damaging way, honestly, would be a break higher, suck some people in. Everybody says, hey, we're in the clear, prices are going to rally, here comes 6K, and then it's a fake out, and then we see a retest of the lows here around that 3K level or slightly undercutting it. Generally, the markets do what less people expect, what is most surprising, as we've often seen. And so that would be a more bearish scenario in my opinion, that false break and then a big rollover, but it certainly could just break lower from here. So it's anyone's guess at this point which way it's going to go. There are certainly some news catalysts coming up that could drive that major next movement. Right now, I'm just watching this range really tighten up and just going to sit tight and see how this plays out here. Now, there's some other interesting pattern I wanted to point out here that somebody in the Slack group pointed out, so I thought I'd share that with you guys here. He was asking about this big falling wedge. Now, if you take the log off, right, and just normalize the chart, he was asking about a big falling wedge here on this chart. And the chart picture initially looked like this. And he said, well, what do I think about this potential scenario? But what I wanted to point out was a falling wedge needs to have at least 4 touch points. And the way I would have drawn that a little bit better would have been this way here, and then using this and discounting that wick a little bit, and using the most touch points, which is right here. Now, the touch points don't have to be exactly on the line. You want them to be as close, but the idea is you don't have this huge white space like you would if you drew the line from here to here. You'd have all this white space before the next touch point. And so the more you can get them here, you can see here there's quite a few. If you do it this way here, you can count these as potential points. Obviously these, this one here, and then this most recent low. And so from that perspective, there is a case to be made for, hey, there's this falling wedge starting to form, but it's still a pretty wide range. You can see from where we're at right now, even a rally to the top of the line gets it to about 4,600, 4,700, and then you could still see another low, a retest, which is, at this point, the lower line is, 1,500. I'm not exactly projecting that low, but you could certainly see a retest, 3K, maybe a little bit lower, and then the breakouts. Alternatively, you can see a retest from the line at this point. Maybe that's that 2,500 we were just pointing out, and then you see a break above line at that point. So interesting pattern. It's not necessarily one I'm going to trade off of in the big picture, but he pointed it out, and I was thinking this is actually pretty interesting to see how this will play out. And again, this is a weekly chart, longer term, so you're talking over the next couple of months, this pattern could continue to play out. And finally, taking a granular look, looking at this 4-hour chart on BTC here really quick, not a whole lot. You can see just these very choppy, wide and loose action, big wicks on both sides. The battle continues between the bulls and the bears. The sellers have a slight upper hand because the broader trend is in the favor of the downside. And so just keep that in mind. We're continuing to see these lower lows here in the near term. So I'd leaned slightly bearish. It could go either way, but I'm leaning 60-40 down up, and we'll have to see how this plays out over the next couple of days. We could see that break out of range here over the weekend. So what I'm watching here in the near term is these two wicks that served as support here. That's basically right around that 35.40 level, and then of course the low here around 34.80. But again, just sideways choppy action, very trendless, not a lot of follow through in either direction, and the same has been for most of the major cap names. However, there have been a few big rallies here over the last couple of days. Before we get to those, very quickly, let's take a look at some of the other charts. Looking at Ethereum versus BTC, this is an update on the chart I showed in my last video. We had seen a very solid break above this downtrend line. We saw that retest that I was looking for potentially, but this retest came on the back of news. This really was that drop driven off of the news of the delayed hard fork. And since then, prices just have not been able to do much, just kind of rolling over here, choppy a little bit, starting to drift lower, still above this support level and still above the low from last week. But again, no follow through in the big picture. The trend is still going downward, and we have yet to see if this is going to be the low. I would have liked to see a retest of this line and then a quick rally that made a higher high relative to these highs, but obviously we didn't see that here. So ETH continues to remain under pressure here versus Ripple versus BTC, starting to undercut some support here. It had hit this point here multiple times in the last week or so and is starting to drift lower and roll over here now. So breaking below, really needs to turn a corner if it's going to be a fake out. But right now, again, just like ETH, the pressure remains here, just drifting lower versus Bitcoin. Not a lot of follow through. So until some of these can start to turn the corner, change the trend and start making those higher highs and get these moving averages moving up again, you got to remain defensive, because right now this is leaning bearish and looking like it wants to go lower. And to keep with the bearish trend, before we get to the nice looking charts, Bitcoin Cash versus BTC, you can see here this has just been under pressure, not been able to break above this downtrend line after peaking from a very strong rally, and right now is forming a little bit of a descending triangle, sitting right above support. Has not broken it yet, but it's not looking pretty good here. You can see this has been tested multiple times, and it looks like a break is going to happen one way or the other here over the next 2 to 3 days. So I'd like to see if this can break above this trend line, but right now, again, the momentum is to the downside. Odds favor a break lower just based on the chart. So keep an eye on this one here, especially if you are liking it. I'd be cautious here with this support being so close. Now on the positive, Binance coin just continues to march up, and you can see it's had this very nice, very steady trend, multiple touches to this trend line. The daily charts are just writing up the moving averages. Very good price action here. I was watching this one this week, was liking this one for a potential entry here as it was consolidating here in this range. Of course it broke out, but because of the instability, the choppy action that I've seen in Bitcoin and some of the other alts, I did take a few trades, and it was just very choppy, just unreliable, and so I had to pass on Binance coin. It is still marching higher, and this is a breakout on the daily chart. If you look at the big picture on the daily, it was breaking above some resistance in and around that 1650 level, so continues to march higher. One of the stronger names here this week. Not a huge gainer, but again, just very steady here over the last couple of weeks and very much in an uptrend. Link continues to push higher. This one is in new high ground, essentially. I mean, it's pulled back from the recent highs, but if you look at the big picture, this is the daily chart, has cleared these prior highs and has just been one of the strongest names here over the last couple of months, and very much so here in recent weeks. So, and when these names are into new high ground, it's just really gets the momentum. There's not a lot of overhead resistance, and so, you know, the trend is very much in favor of the bulls right now, and it's anyone's guess at this point how high it can keep going. So it just has been one of these strong ones here, and the volume coming in, very strong volume on Link here over the last couple of weeks. Augur, massive run here in the last couple of days, launching Veil on the Augur platform using 0x. So the mainnet launch of that is partly what's contributed to this massive run, but you're seeing this very nice breakout that we had here. You can see it tested this multiple times, was really setting up, had a breakout, a little bit of a throwback entry, And then here over the last couple of days, last week or so, just very solid move to the upside with huge volume again coming in. A lot of volume coming in right at the top. Always makes me a little cautious when I see these long wicks with this massive volume, but nonetheless, very strong move here for Augur this week. And if we look at some of the other small micro cap, mid cap even, I mean, just really small names, you look at Ethos, $19 million market cap, but had a massive run here today. In the last couple of days, up huge. Today, up almost 50%. Power Ledger up 44% here in the last week. Steam, as we saw, up 25%. Steam backed dollars. Steam was up big as well. And so really, it was a good week for some of these small cap names. Often very illiquid, very hard to follow and hard to trade names, but there was some other names that were just moving higher. If we look at Doc, it had a huge breakout after this little symmetrical triangle here, but again, just very choppy, very liquid, and then here in the last couple of days has been even more volatile, but just having these big runs. And we've seen quite a few examples of this here this week. Some of these very small cap, low liquidity names just having these huge runs. Another news item I forgot to mention was Cryptopia and some of the exchange issues. Poloniex was down, and so was an interesting week, and there was some of these names that were moving here related to that as well. A lot of the Bittrex names have been running, so it's just been a interesting week for the very small cap type of names. But all in all, Bitcoin continues to remain choppy, is coiling up a little bit here. The range is still very much in place. So we'll see how this plays out here over the next couple of days. As we often see, there's generally a big move out of range, several percent in one direction or the other. So I would not be surprised to see something like that again happen over the next few days. So that's going to be it for today, guys. I appreciate you guys watching as always. I hope you have a wonderful rest of your weekend. Till next time, take care, everyone.